Good morning. Welcome to episode 4 of What the Bleep Are We Talking About with Ian and Ryan, featuring
Devon.
Thank you for being here, Devon.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me.
Hey, good morning, guys. It's so fun to be back. I know we've had a little bit of a hiatus because of a number of things. New Year, my birthday, some travel, life in general. And so this is actually our first opportunity to get back together in the studio and drop in. And I'm feeling super honored to have Devon join us today. He's a dear friend of mine and a brother, and I'm excited to see what he has to bring and share with us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Thank you, Longmont Public Media. Shout out.
Yes,
I'm going to try not to cuss a whole lot this episode. Maybe we can be on before 10 p.m.
And let's be real.
Yeah, for sure.
So, what brings us in today?
I would like to bring a topic of accountability and recognizing how do we navigate situations and relationships where people in our lives can't or won't be accountable.
Including ourselves.
Including ourselves.
Right.
But yeah, that 100%. I think, though, but with ourselves, we can control that. So how do we navigate situations where others can't or won't be accountable? And we can't control that. We can't deal with that.
Yeah.
How do we deal with the feelings? Feelings that come up around that.
How do we hold space for the chaos that we experience? And oftentimes that chaos hurts and affects our life greatly.
Absolutely. And I know personally from my experiences that for me has led me into states of feeling hopeless, helpless, and powerless because there is a large part of me that is wanting to control, to create like safety and security. I know for me in particular, like in my intimate relationships, this is where this shows up the most. And it's brutal when there's a person that I'm connected to on some level of intimacy, and I feel like I'm all alone in that relationship because they're not willing to be responsible or own what's theirs, and they keep projecting it all back onto me.
You bring up relationship and intimacy. What just came up for me was an interesting idea that I started wrestling with years ago was the idea that we don't attract what we want, we attract what we are. So I ask, if you're experiencing these qualities that you perceive in others in the name of accountability, are those qualities being exhibited by you too in some way?
It's so interesting that you bring this up because just last night I sat in on this introduction to a training about the blending of shadow work and family constellation work. And the teacher was literally like, the introduction to this was about how like trauma shows up for us. And what happens is that we experience a trauma, some part of ourselves is not safe, and we to survive in some way, we sort of take that part out of us and put it someplace where it doesn't have to like be felt or experienced, but it creates a void. And then so that void is constantly trying to be filled because that's what all voids want, is to be filled. And so then we keep attracting people into our lives who have the ability to potentially fill it, but it's never us filling it. It's something from the outside, and that's what creates a lot of health. And so it's exactly what you're talking about, how, like in this concept of how we attract other aspects that we're seeking, and we don't necessarily do it in the greatest of ways. And it was really insightful to think about, like, what is showing up? Like, he was talking about, like, what you're attracted to very likely could be the very thing that you feel you're missing.
Yeah, that goes back to this amazing book I just read recently by Robert A. Johnson, a student of Carl Jung. And this is kind of, he wrote a series book about the male psyche, about the female psyche called He and She. And then he wrote this amazing book in like 1984. It's an oldie but goodie and very relevant. But this one is called We. And it's kind of about, there's a lot of different premises in it, but the main concept is, and it's kind of written really more from the male perspective, but essentially how often what we're attracted to and who we seek is we're actually seeking our own, as men, our own long lost feminine soul. And then we project that onto the female if this is very heteronormative, but in our romantic relationships. And what we're actually doing is we're projecting our own selves onto our partners and actually not experiencing them as who they are.
This is making my spine tingle. One thing I really want to do is back up and try to define accountability.
Yeah.
Just as a thing. Is that okay?
That's perfect.
Absolutely, yeah. I think it helps refocus us maybe a little bit as well.
This is that's all gold, and it's very real.
Yeah, it's a nice little roadmap where we can go with this because this is why this topic excited me because there's a lot of fun. I do want to back up one thing real quick about when I mentioned when I proposed this thing about accountability. How do we deal with people who can't own it or won't own it? The simple pop psychology answer is boundaries. But what does that look like? And there's so much to unpack out of all of that because it's not always easy to put that in place, in certain relationships. So
absolutely, and then a concept about that, which is becoming more and more important for me to stay present to, is this idea of when we separate this part of ourselves out, we're unsafe, and in the young part of ourselves, we think that we're doing something to protect ourselves, and we're creating. Or what we would suggest we're creating is like a boundary, and actually what we're doing is creating a wall that our younger selves feel is creating safety, and it actually is so rigid that it ends up becoming harmful to us instead of supportive to us. And learning how to move from the rigidity of a wall, the protection we perceive a wall gives us, to the actual capacity that a boundary can create for us, because a boundary isn't as rigid as a wall.
What I'm hearing are things that I think could get in the way of accountability. And accountability to me sits at the same table as integrity. And it sits at the same table as responsibility. A quick AI overview of the word accountability means
cheater
being responsible for one's actions, decisions, and commitments, and being willing to accept responsibility or give a satisfactory reason for them. Well, thanks, AI. One really simple question that I read was, raise your hand if or do you have a gap in your life between what you would like to do and what you actually do.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, hell yeah.
Right? I think people can raise their hands to that.
So I'd like to chime in on your definition of accountability there. And this is from MKP, from Mankind Project. That's pretty much spot on. The only thing I would kind of add to it is at the end, the ancillary point at the end would be that, and to take ownership or recognition of how that impacts others.
Oh, that's big.
And then there's actually another piece to that even, which is when we're really in accountability, it's self-accountability. It's not somebody else holding us accountable for an agreement that we make. And that, like in the men's work teaching that we do, that is how we know we're like in our power, is because we're self-accountable. And part of self-accountability is, again, it's funny that this ties in, but it's similar to the concept of a wall and a boundary. So a wall is really rigid. Like in a rigid state of accountability, you're right or you're wrong. You're in or you're out of accountability. But when you're really holding yourself accountable, when you realize you're either moving towards being out of accountability or you realize you are out of account with an agreement you've made, the mature approach is to own it. And this goes back to this talk of responsibility. Yeah. But then to go one step further is to say, okay, if you own it, now what do you do with it? Do you ignore it or do you address it?
Well, let me ask you a question. What's the point of accountability?
Wait. Before you say anything, I love this idea. I want all three of us to answer that in our own way.
Yeah. What's good about it? Why have it?
Okay. I know what it is for me. And I'm sure this is all related to like my childhood stuff, of course.
It usually is.
But I feel accountability creates safety and security. Like if I am in a relationship with you and you continue to be out of account because you break agreements, that doesn't feel good. You don't feel trustworthy or safe to me then. And that's like, to me, a really core component of why accountability is so important. And I think about it in all these different parts of how we live our lives, professionally, romantically, because I'm moving into this whole idea of learning how to be a parent, and then how to teach a child, and really not teach so much as model. And then pass that on to another generation. So that to me is what accountability holds.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer that question by adding on to what you did. So what you said. So I got the touchy mic here. There we go. It's got a little touchy jiggle here. So
I think it's your electric personality.
it might just be. So running hot over here. so when you create the culture of safety through accountability, what can be built on top of that is intimacy and connection.
Yeah.
Right? When there's safety. And the big part of that too is a lot of people, there's this kind of common refrain about like, I want to be seen, heard, and understood. And that's a whole other topic in itself. Because my whole thing is like, well, understanding takes time. And I might try to understand, but I can't. But seen and heard are things I can do right now. And I think being accountable for how my actions impact you allows you space to be seen and heard and valued. Right? Like, oh, I see how I did this and affected you that way. I'm sorry about that.
I love that you just kind of tried to build in another appearance on the podcast for yourself.
Oh, I sure did, didn't I? I got all kinds of ideas.
So one thing,
Rotating guests here.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm hearing a lot about how accountability plays into our relationships with others. I believe that starts with our relationship with ourselves.
Of course.
How are we accountable to ourselves? Because when I hear the word safety, what came up for me was trust. I believe that accountability, taking responsibility of your actions, builds a system of trust. If I am constantly not doing what I want to do, I, on some level, am not doing what I need to do to trust myself. How are we going to have an effective or fulfilling relationship with others if we can't do that with ourselves?
Yeah,
if I can't trust myself, how could I trust someone else?
No, I love it.
Yeah, the answer is that you won't be able to, or you'll struggle.
And most
or
likely,
I'll project more and sabotage any relationship if I'm. Because one thing that I know I've done is I have not been accountable to myself, and then I would project things onto my partner because I would unconsciously need them to do things to make me feel better because I wouldn't do it for myself.
Yep.
And I think that kind of goes into, there was a lot touched on earlier when we sort of jumped out of the gate, and it's.
Yeah, well, I think that projection is a real downstream consequence of a lack of accountability. And I think, definitely when you're not accountable, it begins with yourself. And then when you're not accountable to yourself, you tend to, I'm not going to repeat what you said. what you said.
One thing that I know is that I still want to get into like more about what accountability is and how to create self-accountability and all that. But one thing that I know, and everyone listening, and you guys have probably experienced this at some point, is interacting with people who take accountability as an attack. Anyone in life who is not aware or refuses to acknowledge how their behavior affects someone else will take accountability as an attack. Because accountability, I believe, is akin to responsibility. If I don't take or do not have the facilities, because a lot of people, especially older generations, there's so much like don't talk unless you're spoken to. A lot of men, we grow up in the toughen up, buttercup, don't express feelings, that's weakness kind of stuff, right? So there's not the tools to understand this stuff.
Well,
right?
Yeah, and a big part of the men's work teaching around all this is how we live our lives. And I think that's kind of what you're speaking to, like how conscious or unconscious are we as we move through our lives? And I think I'll just speak for myself, and what I imagine is true for most men around what you're talking about is we're actually, I think, in a lot of ways, trained to stay unconscious about these parts of ourselves, and therefore it makes it really hard for us to even conceive the idea of like our behavior has potentially negative impacts on others.
Well, and it's one thing to take responsibility for how our behavior is affecting someone else, but to foster the awareness around how we affect our own feelings
As well.
Which would create the engine that recreates the same behaviors. First off, I think it's one of the most difficult things on earth. It was for me to take responsibility for my behavior. Because before I was able to understand how to do that, I would blame. Mm-hmm. I would look at the world and say, that's why I don't feel good. I never understood how I was playing into that. So
Yep.
if we don't take responsibility for our own actions, right? That's what I'm getting at, is like, I feel like that's kind of where it begins, is awareness around how much responsibility we take for our reality.
Absolutely.
Well, and there's 3 legs of that stool, right? So it's being accountable to ourselves, being accountable for how our actions affect others, and then recognizing when someone else can't be accountable and is projecting onto us. And that's actually why I brought that topic forward, right? Because so for me, it's not absolute. I've definitely gone plenty in blame and shame and angry at the world and all kinds of things in my life, but my default was to always make it my fault. Mm-hmm. In fact, I actually was almost like, I don't want to say, this is before I recognized what accountability was, but I just, because it's like, little kids, there's this kind of idea that they're selfish little creatures. And in many ways that happens when mom and dad are having a fight, they think it's somehow their fault. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so there's been this kind of thing where like just guilt just shows up all the time.
I want to interrupt you, but I don't want to stop the train of thought we were going. But there's a piece of what you said that I want to address around little children. You used the word selfish, and my belief is, and the teaching that I have is, it's not about selfishness. It's about a power dynamic, power struggle that exists in the relationship between children and parents, and that there is no possible way for the child's psyche to see the parent as bad or wrong because they're so dependent on their survival for the parent.
Sure. I like that clarification.
And so what has to happen, therefore, from the child's perspective is they have to make it about them as the fault because they can't assign fault to this parent that is the source of their survival.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So,
yeah.
And from the age of 1 to 5, the human brain, a child's brain is malleable clay.
Very.
And it, for better or for worse, is taking in all sensory input as normal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So if it grows up in chaos becomes the norm. Mm-hmm. And there is, I grew up, my parents, I love them both dearly. They used me to communicate because they were recently divorced, and it was, well, go tell your father this. Well, go tell your mother this. Well, your mother's poisoning you against me. Well, your father's poisoning you against me. And I'm, I don't want to go to, I don't need to sing that song right now, but that's where my feeling of, I would go to a parent and I would be so excited to see him, and I just thought I was doing the right thing. I'm going to deliver dad's message. I'm going to deliver mom's message. And then to see the disappointment and the pain in their eyes, I started associating sharing and being honest. And, I thought it was my fault I didn't understand that they were just hurt. Right. They were so hurt. They were heartbroken. And it was like, it had nothing to do with me. But anyway.
Yeah.
So
much there.
As a child of divorce, I can relate to that as well. My parents divorced. My parents divorced when I was a baby. Yeah. So there's a lot. So there's a whole lot going on with that. Yep. So this is coming back to this thing around accountability. Mm-hmm. Like, so 2 primary relationships in my life where I've witnessed where people can't be accountable and won't be accountable, and are my parents, both my mom and my dad. And I love them both very much, and I have really wonderful relationships with both of them. They've been equally challenging in their own ways. But and so part of this navigating, this is a relationship I just can't abandon. It's not, a lot of good things about my childhood. So this is one of these things. How do I navigate? Because they're old boomers. They're not going to change at this point. They're just not. I mean, my dad is now experiencing early onset dementia. So that's a huge, heavy piece. And so a common thing that I took along. So this is just an example. Is with what you were speaking to was, and with my mother, is that she had a lifelong wound over my dad leaving at a very young age for someone else much younger, and it was a real painful thing. And so what she did, and this is I have grace for this, but she projected a lot of guilt and shame onto my brother around this. So when you spoke to how delivering the message, to your dad or something, and they were disappointed to respond to that, I felt that right here because I experienced that exact same thing. Well, your father, and getting that all the time, and and any kind of positive thing that this is a little bit of story here, but positive experience I'd have with my dad, my dad's lifelong passion was river sports. So I grew up doing these amazing kayaking, rafting trips and stuff. And my mom she hated that. She always had to tear it down. It was always like my brother became this amazing, when he was we were both when we were 18, 19, 20, we were doing class 5 water all across Colorado. Wow. We were into it. Wow. And she was it's dangerous, it's bad, it's a terrible thing, you're doing that. And then I remember my brother was just he just was dedicated to it this one particular summer. And he was doing class 5 plus stuff. He was doing some big water stuff. And my mom just kept telling him, you're a monomaniac, you're obsessed with this and blah, blah, blah. And looking back on it now, it's he's into a thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the way that she so that's the thing that I've come to, I'll get the end of this here. This is the thing I came to process about my mom. And then in recent times when some things have come up for me, but then I saw how I accused her of well, you just need to get over it and forgive dad and quit doing this. And then I finally came to realization, and this is where boundaries come in, is that I've learned to I've realized, you know what? She gets to have, I'm just going to say it, she gets to have a fuck you to my dad. She just gets to have that for life.
Now we're after 10 o'clock. Thanks a lot, Devon.
So,
I'm kidding.
I was going there too.
I'm kidding.
I knew it was an option, so I'm going to drive it.
It's always there. Bring your real self, man.
So, I can only get 200 words in, and then that just produces a word.
That's just how I process it. She gets to have that, and therefore I let her have that, and I now have a boundary. And I finally got clear about my boundaries around her, about what she can project onto me about her relationship.
Ooh, yeah.
And a big part of this was I told her that to her face. I get it now. You get to have that to my dad. I understand why. I don't need to put pressure on you to forgive him or some kind of thing, because that's what I was doing, where I was making her change in some way. And this is where the self-accountability and the boundary is. I can't hold her accountable. I can only be accountable myself and put a boundary up against her. And the boundary is there's lots of love and connection going through there, but one thing that it filters out is you projecting the guilt you wish my father felt is not coming here.
That's
not mine.
I just had a hankering to share a poem I wrote.
Recently, or
I wrote this when I was studying integrated health and wellness coaching. Would you be interested in hearing a quick poem?
So I would, but while you're pulling that up, I'm going to offer a tool for people around these kind of things. As a little mantra I say to myself.
Oh yeah.
When it comes to boundaries, is that's not mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this goes back to this idea of being able to move from unconscious to conscious, because we can't have even the kind of clarity or ability to discern between something that's ours or something that's another's, and how to find that capacity to, you use the word filter, which I love, how to have the capacity to actually discern between mine and other. And how to leave it on which side of the boundary.
Yeah, that's the core of the conversation we'll bring today.
So. Yeah, and I love that, by the way, because I think it's consciousness is the, how do I want to put this? It's the magic of healing, in my judgment.
If you can feel it, you can heal it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I agree that how accountability and boundaries and awareness plays into most of our reality, but I still want to get back to how we foster it with ourselves first. I don't have the the poem on my phone anymore.
No.
But it was getting at this idea of one thing that came up for me listening to you just now was the idea of mindfulness. Because even if we're lucky and fortunate enough to foster enough awareness to begin to understand what is ours and what isn't, right? Because growing up, at work, in relationship, anytime a partner or a boss or a coworker went from smiling to not smiling, my brain would start to go, what did I do? What did I do? What did I do? They're upset. And then I would ruminate on it for the rest of the day. What did I do? What did I do? What did I do? How can I make it better? And it took 30 years to begin to figure out that, most of the time people get upset, again, has nothing to do with me. This is not something that's, I think it's more challenging to accept this, but we are responsible for our feelings. I'm not discrediting true victimization of people in the world. There are people being
Absolutely
killed
straight up,
right now. That is a nightmare. But a lot of our suffering does come from the meaning that we assign to the events in our life. So understanding comes first, but I'll jump right into how do we take responsibility for our feelings? And well, I don't think that's a question. I think that's something that I think is really important to mull over. If I were responsible for my life and start looking into how I play into what I may perceive as suffering that I am receiving versus participating in.
So I'm going to add something real quick and just say, so with feelings are data. So the data is, why am I feeling this? And so I think so, and this ties back to accountability, right? So so this idea of how you foster with yourself. So I'm going to just kind of throw out 3 things. One, a tool for accountability is agreements. And I think boundaries. And again, this idea of boundaries not being a wall, but being a permeable, dynamic membrane. Because boundaries aren't just keeping things out; they're about holding things in. Right. So there's a whole lot to explore around boundaries. Because that's a big tool for being accountability. And then the third is community. Like one way that we be accountable to ourselves is we have friends or community or men's groups where we say, hey, I'm going to fast on Tuesdays. I'm going to start working towards fasting. I want to start being better for my health. I want to eat better. And I'm going to, next Tuesday, I'm going to try to fast till, this is what I did recently. I'm going to try to fast till at least 4 o'clock. All right. And then next week, I'm going to push it later. And then we meet again. If I didn't do that, I have friends who will ask me questions, who do a process of well, why didn't you fast? If you broke your agreement with yourself, why did you do this? Let's look at that in a very supportive, just having friends. That's community is a big part. We actually can't keep ourselves accountable on our own. We need others.
I respectfully disagree.
Fair enough.
I think it's really important. If you don't mind, I want to be able to share this.
I love both. I love this right here because go ahead.
Let's have a moment. So I think it's really, really important.
Wait, you're disagreeing with me? What I do wrong?
Right. Nothing.
Hold on. We'll get back to you.
Believe it or not, people have different feelings on things, and that's one of the reasons we're here, is to create constructive discourse.
Yeah, of course.
So I think I don't want to create a barrier to entry to accountability and make it dependent on others. I think it's really, really important to foster what I believe is possible, and that's self-accountability. Self-accountability, I love what you said, agreements. Agreements, just like you were talking about fasting. I want to start a new diet. I'm tired of feeling lethargic. I'm tired of looking in the mirror and cringing at what I see, right? I want to eat cleaner. I'm going to go to the gym every day this week, right? There begins a feedback loop in between the commitment and what actually happens. And we can create self-accountability by creating a sustainable feedback loop between what we say we're going to do and what we actually do. If we can make an agreement with ourselves, like I'm going to go to the gym tomorrow, and I don't go to the gym, that can bring up a lot of negative feelings, right? All the, I'm not good, I'm scared, whatever, right? But if we do meet that agreement, we can start to build a system of trust within ourselves.
Right.
And I think it's important because I know that a lot of my life I was suffering from severe depression and severe loneliness. And I thought that I was alone, and I thought I was broken. So I didn't feel empowered to do anything on my own. I thought I needed help. I didn't think I was capable of helping myself. But I don't think accountability is a choice. I don't think it's a character thing. I believe it's a skill that you develop, like you would develop the ability to play an instrument or learn a language. It's not easy, but I do believe it's possible and important to be able to trust yourself through a series of positive feedback loops where because in the beginning, if you struggle with self-accountability, like if you're out there trying to go to the gym every day and for whatever reason you just don't all the time and you get caught up in this, I'm failing because I didn't do it and why can't I do it, which brings up another topic about perfectionism and how we get stuck in this loop.
That's a whole separate. That is a whole separate.
We set our bar so
sure.
high that we can never meet it, which is a negative feedback loop where we get caught in this rut where we say, well, I'm just not good enough. I can never hit these marks. So can I offer a very practical jumping point into what I was just talking about fostering self-accountability. And it has to, first of all, take a look at that gap between what you want your life to look like, what you want to do, and what you're actually doing.
So I want to address actually what both of you have brought in, which I think is great, and to make it even more inclusive because it's not an either or.
I agree. I was going to.
And this is how I see that. And I love that you brought in this idea of, I think you were just talking about learning, like how to learn to play an instrument. So there are people in the world that have the capacity to pick up a guitar and listen to something and then reproduce it. Like that. So to me, that's somebody that metaphorically is capable of self-accountability. There are other people who pick up a guitar, have this immense desire to want to play the guitar, but they need guidance. They need mentoring. They need a teacher.
How does the ability to pick up a guitar and start playing it have to do with accountability?
Let me get there. So those people who can't just pick up the guitar, hear something, and then produce it on the instrument or the guitar, we'll just use the guitar, they require some kind of mentorship, teaching, modeling, something, because their brains are different. And there's probably more than two types of people that I'm breaking this into because I'm using the two types based on Devon's description and your description of accountability or accountability and what you were saying is self-accountability. So the connection to accountability is there are people who can see that they want to be self-accountable and they can hold themselves to it. And there are very, very, very definitely people who no matter how desperately they want to show up a certain way, it's just harder than they can do on their own. And those people need support. And that's kind of like what Devon was talking about. I believe, and I'm going to bring in something here that in and of itself is also a whole separate episode, but what happens for us and why accountability becomes so difficult for us, even those of us that are capable of doing it on our own, is that there's a part of ourselves that's showing up that's interfering with a desire, like to hold myself accountable or to make the change that I want, if it's a diet or exercise. No matter how badly I want that, there may be still some aspect of myself that is interfering at a very deep level that keeps me from doing what I want to do.
Yeah.
And that, in my experience, the word is that's been used to describe that is shadow. Shadow is, in a very simplistic description of it, so people can have a concept, is a part of myself that I hide, repress, or deny. And it is so completely powerful for some of us that no matter how significant it is that we have a desire to do something, be something, create something in the world, that this shadow part of ourselves says, no, that's not okay. That's not allowed. That's not safe.
Those are the real reasons why we would or wouldn't do something.
Well, and I also had this thought, I'm going to bring it in now as like maybe a pin, but you talked earlier about how we create meaning and we apply meaning to things. My opinion is so much of that, most of that actually gets created in our childhoods. And until we find the ways to do some exploration into that part of ourselves, that meaning making, which very likely is coming out of shadow, is going to be an interference to showing up and living the lives that we truly desire and want to be.
Sure.
Yeah. And so I think it's like you agreed. I think it's a both and. Like it's one, the other, or possibly both.
I'd like to add to that as well. The both and is that I mentioned like a three-legged stool of what I say, community, boundaries, and I forget what I said.
Community, boundaries, and agreements.
And agreements, right? So agreements is part of agreements with yourself, and agreements when you declare agreements for other people. But we can just we can take away a three-legged stool and just make it a four-legged chair. Part of it too is also. So I think the fundamental kind of the how do we keep ourselves accountable? The fundamental building block to that, I think, is self-regulation. And self-regulation, a big part of self-regulation, because all these things too, they're all practices. Accountability is not a destination. You're not accountable or you're not. It's a practice. It's a lifelong practice.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the self-regulation part is kind of, okay, I made an agreement with myself. And how do I have grace for myself? And how do I do better? And I think so. To go back to your analogy of instruments, since we're kind of on that, I am a musician, and I play classical piano, and I can play great by myself. But I've recently started playing a piece with a friend of mine who plays violin, and we're working on this kind of duet. And all of a sudden, it's been a long time since I've been in an orchestra or played with others. Keeping time and playing with like someone else is actually quite a bit harder, but it also makes me better as opposed to just doing it on my own. So I think this idea of, this idea we want to like make sure I think there's the idea of like, we don't want to like rely on, there's like a spectrum here. We don't rely on community too much. We need to have the ability to do it within ourselves. But utilizing community is just another huge tool in the tool set to be better at it.
100%.
Absolutely.
And I do think it's essential. I think we can't do it. We can't do it completely on our own. We can't rely completely on community. We need a back and forth between self and community.
Community, especially a healthy one, is a blessing.
And going towards shadow.
Actually,
that's
the most important of all.
The big thing about shadow is that it's people who love us the most can see our shadows the best and can reflect those onto us.
Yeah,
one thing that I heard you say, you were talking about people that are accountable can pick up a guitar and like recreate a song. I think what I think you are saying is, it's not that because I think they're like brains do work differently, and people, there's prodigies and they can just do it, right?
Yep,
but I think what I'm hearing you say is someone that would have the commitment and discipline to teach themselves would be accountable to their own desire to learn that instrument.
Yes and no. I still believe, I completely believe, like there are people that have the exact same amount of commitment and desire, but one of those people could pick up the guitar and move through it on their own and educate themselves, learn what it takes to produce music from that instrument. And there's another individual who has this, if there's a way to measure this, like to measure desire and to measure commitment, and they have equal amounts of both. There is going to be another individual that just needs something beyond themselves to do the same thing.
Sure.
Some people, it's just innate.
Right.
Some people just can kind of being self-aware just is more innate for them.
More intuitive.
And some people, and a lot of that, and some of that's like just whatever natural talent, how they develop. Some of it has to do with childhood.
I think
Absolutely.
Going back-
Maybe actually all of it. I think all of it has to do with childhood.
going back to my idea of starting with self accountability, I think fostering, if say you're out there and you're someone who struggles with the discipline to sit there and teach yourself over the time and take the time, I want to learn to draw. I wrestle with doing it every night, right? I think you could become someone that could pick up an instrument and play it if you wanted to by fostering accountability, self-accountability. If you struggle with it, I think it's possible to create that ability and grow it so that you could become the kind of person that could just pick up an instrument and learn.
I agree with that. And what I think that triggered for me is, and then if you become aware that this is harder for you, why put yourself on a path that means that you're going to have to struggle, where there's the possibility of reducing that struggle by not having to do it alone?
Well, sure. I have never and will never disagree that having community isn't a huge blessing. It's really important. But I want to also be accessible to the people out there that are super alone in their life. Maybe struggling with addiction, maybe struggling, recently divorced and they literally have no one. Maybe their family's dead. Maybe all their friends are gone, and it's like, I don't think community, is something you can just go out and pick up at a store. Right. So it's like, I think I see this grand spectrum between how accountability starts with the self and then grows into community. Right. And how it applies in both realms. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think it's part of a bigger spectrum. Salute. One quote that I wanted to share that I really love, which goes into this, I was talking about positive and negative feedback loops around attempting to grow accountability. Because I've struggled with perfectionism where I will set my own bar so high. I'm going to go to the gym every day this week. Yep. And then when I don't, it breaks my motivation because then I start coming up with reasons why I'm not good enough to go 5 times a week. Right? So this quote I read, I love it. It says, "You're going to mess up."
Yeah, exactly.
So instead of trying to be perfect, learn how to be accountable. Thank you, Whitney Goodman.
So that's a beautiful segue into a teaching piece around accountability, which is built on one of the legs that Devon brought in, who's smiling because he knows exactly what I'm going to say, is this idea of how to make an agreement that actually sets you up for success so that you change that whole dynamic in your self-perception.
Yes.
And a lot of people know this acronym. It's called a SMART agreement.
Ooh.
Are you familiar with it?
No.
Oh, here we go.
Here we go.
Let's do it. Let's get into some practical, actionable stuff.
You want to bring it in? Or we can do it together?
I feel like I've
you
heard
do
it,
because
maybe.
I forget what
Okay,
that
I might be thinking of SMRT from Simpsons.
Oh, you'll have to teach me that one. We can do that next. So SMART agreement is an agreement that's set up in a way to create success.
Yeah.
And if we're successful in an agreement, it's a positive reinforcement, meaning, oh, I can do this, or I'm capable, or it's possible. So I'm going to go through the letters. So the S stands for simple. So the simpler the agreement is, the more likely we are to keep it. The M stands for measurable. So that means we are going to distill the agreement down to make it super clear. Can I be certain that I have kept that agreement or not? An example is I'm going to go to the gym 3 times this week. So I can count, did I get to the gym 3 times or not? A is simple, measurable.
Actionable. Actionable?
No. It's about accomplishing what we want. What's the word?
We have phones. I mean, if we look up some.
Yeah.
Are you guys doing okay, by the way? Do we need bathroom break or drinks? Or
I'm
anything?
good.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to check
We
in.
also are 16 minutes from completion.
So successful, measurable. Thank you, by the way.
Why am I drawing a blank on this now? SMA.
Well, you want to take a minute and look it up?
So
Yeah,
also,
yeah.
one thing I want to say about this too is that. So what's simple? What can I actually? What's realistic for me to
Yeah.
actually accomplish? What that is? That's boundaries.
Okay.
What am I available for? What are my resources?
Being honest with yourself.
Being honest with myself about like how much energy do I have to actually do this compared to other agreements? What that is, that's keeping what's in here. That's having that boundary. So that's where boundaries come in. This is kind of tied to that.
Okay.
that way.
Okay. I hear that. I hear that.
Right.
Absolutely.
All right.
He's looking up right now. Oh, am I flying? Because I
It
want to
didn't give me this simple.
Yeah, I was reading a powerful way to start a accountability positive feedback loop is to set your goals at something that is akin to something you would already normally do. It may seem trivial,
Yeah.
but it's like if I'm going to get up, if I drink coffee anyway, then start with a goal. I'm going to drink 1 cup of coffee every morning this week.
Okay, I have it right here. I have it now.
Okay, great.
So yeah, and that's the thing. That's the simple part of it, right? That's the simple part of it. So I'll just read this off. So specific or simple. A SMART goal clearly defines what you want to accomplish, leaving no room for ambiguity. Measurable. It includes criteria for measuring progress and determining if the goal has been achieved. Achievable. The goal is realistic and within your capabilities. Considering available resources and skills. Available resources. That's that boundary component.
Yep.
Relevant. The goal aligns with your overall objectives and priorities. Time bound. It has a defined time frame or deadline for completion.
And the ultimate goal with this is to feel, yes, thank you, is to feel what it feels like to accomplish, to do what you said you were going to do. Because one powerful way to look at self-accountability is to picture self-accountability like a relationship with a friend. If you constantly were making plans with a friend and they bailed, or if you were constantly wanting to do something with a friend and they come up with reasons why they can't, if you are that friend, then how do you feel about yourself, right? If you're the one that constantly doesn't show up, right? So that's the ultimate goal, is to break that cycle by implementing really easy, accessible steps to start small and then work your way up. You don't have to set your worth is not defined by creating this grand goal and then accomplishing it right away. That's like trying to become a professional dancer overnight, or like a bodybuilder that's super stacked overnight. It doesn't happen. You don't go to the gym once and then come out super stacked. You have to be consistent and you have to start small.
Totally.
So I just want to add something really quick with just an example, like with a friend, how's that person feel about themselves? That's a person who's struggling with boundaries. So one thing, if they have a desire to spend more time with friends, but they're not resourced, but then they overcommit, they're not doing SMART goals.
Yeah.
And this is where there's this beautiful word in the English language called no.
It's you know what I heard at one point, that's a complete sentence.
That's right. No is a complete sentence. So this is this is a bit of a tangent, but I got to hit on that.
So I wanted to bring this back because I know one of our goals is in these conversations is to bring these ideas into word and awareness for ourselves, as well as anybody that chooses to listen to all of what we share here. But like a tool or a way, how does somebody work with this aspect of themselves?
I want to share something.
Oh, yeah?
This is from the Body Brain Alliance. And, I want to give credit to who wrote this article. I'll see if I can do it.
Go ahead, you do that. Let me finish my thought.
Okay.
So
I thought you were asking a question.
No.
I thought you were posing that.
No. I have.
Okay.
I mean, we're talking about like offering like tools and direction.
Yeah, let's get into some actionable steps.
So, and I want to just name like we've been talking for what feels like about 15 minutes for me, and it's actually been 50 minutes.
That's crazy. Yeah, it feels like we just sat
we
down.
don't have a lot of time left, and I want to make sure that we find our way into. I want to say completion because I don't feel we're not close to that at all. But some like a reasonable stopping point, and maybe leaves us at a good picking up point for a continuation of the conversation. With that being said, there are practices that I've been introduced to around accountability to be supported in how am I showing up, how accountable am I, and then going through a process that leads me to deeper and deeper understanding about when I haven't been accountable or kept myself accountable or noticed how I haven't been accountable to somebody else, to bring that level of consciousness up, like consistently, to keep raising my consciousness around what's happening here.
Yeah.
Like, I've made this agreement, I have this desire, and I didn't do it.
What's the real reason behind why?
And that's the process.
And the tool is deploying curiosity over shame.
Ooh,
Yeah, I love that.
Right?
Yes.
Like, okay, I'm gonna be curious about why did I break my, as opposed to I did it again. Oh, you know,
Right.
Yeah.
That's beautiful because, like I said, consciousness is this like major requirement or the magic of like growth and healing.
Yeah.
It's curiosity that breaks the cycle.
Yeah.
Well, and give yourself some slack. Everybody listening, cut yourself some slack. You have to give yourself some grace, and you have to give yourself room to fail. If you're out there struggling with self-accountability or accountability with others, I feel like those could be sort of 2 entire episodes. I know I've been focused on self-accountability, so thank you for your patience. But if you're out there struggling with that, give yourself some grace, because just like that quote said, you're going to mess up. So instead of trying to be perfect all the time, try to be accountable and start really small. One technique that I read about was called a commitment strike. And this helps break up that hardcore ingrained pattern of perfectionism. It's called a commitment strike. For 7 to 10 days, it said, give up everything you said you were going to do. If you said you were going to get up early every morning, don't. If you said you were going to go to the gym every morning, don't. And give yourself a break from all those shoulds, all the shoulds in your life. Whose life are you living anyway? Give up the shoulds for a set amount of time and then go back. And I think, I didn't finish the article when I was reading about it, but you can give yourself, the goal is to break out of that pattern. A lot of times we need to get snapped out of our paradigm, right? Because we get so tunnel vision. But it's to begin to bring levity to that, oh, I should and I'm not. I should and I'm not.
I love that because that's like a cleanse. Is what you're saying.
The way that we do, I like the wiping the slate clean.
Yeah.
Just doing a desk clear.
Yeah.
Know? So a tool for that works for me in my life is either affirmations or mantras. So sometimes when I get caught in a cycle of should, I'll pause, get self-aware, and think, oh, I'm shoulding on myself.
Yeah.
Or another one,
I got should on my
again,
foot.
with the boundary promote, like, oh, that's not mine. Or even just saying the words like, oh, I'm accountable for that. Just saying those words out loud. So like little, just like pause. Like, or what's behind that? Or when we do kind of accountability processes in Mankind Project, that we kind of ask these questions like, well, you didn't do it. What did you choose to do instead?
Yeah.
So asking yourself these questions, it's like pausing and just these little like writing mantras and affirmations down, or just having them to just like stop. And that to me is the path for grace and forgiveness and just being accountable. It's like, oh, I'm accountable for that.
I love what you both said. You both brought up the idea of asking why. You know, why didn't this happen? It's really important to be very, not critical, but very
Curious.
Very curious, but very real and honest about why you might not be doing something that you want to do. Because in those actual whys, in lies the material you can actually work with.
Right. And it's the source of what's in the way.
Yeah.
And if we never choose to put attention on it, then I believe we're just going to be left in frustration because we have this desire and we want, and then we keep failing and we can't figure out why we're failing and not creating the world and life we want. And we don't ever slow down enough to be like, what is it that's showing up consistently that doesn't allow me to be the man or woman or person that I want to be?
Yeah. You could write that down. Start a list, everybody. Like, why? What is causing me to not live the life that I want to live?
And if you can't make that list, ask yourself why you can't make the list.
There you go.
It begins with that, right?
Right.
Okay, I'm going to make a list of things I need to be accountable for, blah, blah. Then, well, I didn't do that. Why did I not make the list?
And if you're still stuck, that's where maybe trying to do it on your own isn't going to be the starting point for you, which isn't a good or bad thing. It's just the fact. And then seek an ally. Find a trusted person in your life that you can raise this concept to and say, I'm missing something. I can't figure this out. can you reflect something to me that I maybe am not seeing in myself that could give me a starting point for me to become curious about and start to explore what might be the whys for why I'm struggling the way I am.
Sure.
And or look for community, but there's no like one solution for this.
Yeah, like when you spoke earlier about, well, there's people out there who don't have community; they're alone, and my kind of response to that is like, gotta get it. It's essential. We evolved to be creatures in bands.
I think the way I started producing real community for myself was by being honest with myself first.
And in the name of accountability, we got 5 minutes left, so let's do our gratitude practice.
So we opened a huge can of worms with this episode. I would like to propose another episode on this topic.
100%. I'd love to.
I think we have a lot more to cover.
Absolutely.
In the closing moments of this episode, I would like for each of us to share something we're really grateful for, something that we may have learned or taken away from this conversation. And I do want to reiterate to everyone listening, if you're struggling with self-accountability, start small. Start with something that's really easy for you to achieve and just get that feedback loop going. Maybe you don't know exactly where it leads, but just start doing something that you say you're going to do.
Yep. I'm gonna jump in and go first. It's not new to me, but it's something that I struggle to stay connected to, and it feels like it's just the biggest game changer for me. Is this idea that Devon spoke about with how to approach anything that is, I'm going to just like in quotation marks, a challenge. To be approaching it with curiosity.
Yeah, curiosity over shame. That was really powerful.
That like, oh God, if I could just do that, how different would so much of how I experience the world be?
Yeah. We can heal our shame. We can heal our guilt. We can let go, which is a form of setting a boundary.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What are you grateful for?
So that's my takeaway. What I'm grateful for is being here. Like, I mean, it's silly, but like Ryan and I challenged ourselves sort of like, hey, we should do a podcast. And then and my unwillingness to be curious about it was like, I can't do a podcast. I don't know what a podcast is. That's not me. And I'm grateful that I'm like sitting in this room with the two of you, and this is what we're doing. And I feel juicy and excited and alive, and
you are juicy.
Wanting more.
Those old limiting beliefs. Eh?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's another topic too. Limiting beliefs.
Cool.
So,
it's all interconnected too.
So a takeaway from me is I kind of like how you really like kind of kept wanting to pull back to self accountability. And part of me almost had this thought, like maybe I really do rely on Beetle too much. I need to be a little bit. I have this need to be a little bit more self accountable. But I like this kind of organic. What I came up with around these like kind of 4 pillars of accountability. I kind of like that. Kind of came organically. And what I earlier said with like we didn't really get into the whole topic how to navigate so much about. We can do that later about others who can or won't. But this idea of just like boundaries, but bringing in these other kind of pieces of accountability are kind of a nice way to, I think, can be applied for navigating that. So that's a little piece I'm going to take away. And I'm also grateful to be here. I love listening to podcasts. It's fun to like finally like make one. That's kind of fun. So I appreciate the invitation to be here today. But there's another thing I was grateful for on my walk down here today. Was as I was walking through the park. The first thing I noticed when I walked outside is this time of year as we hear more birds outside. I'm just grateful for the birds.
Yeah.
And just hearing them chirp around outside and just nature and the planet and there's a friend of mine who's a bird watcher, and she taught me to kind of focus on birds more. And every time I get stressed and lost in my head, she'll always be like, yeah, just shut the fuck up, Devon. Just watch the birds.
I like
just
that.
watch the birds. And every time I do that, that's another little piece giving me the moment. And I just okay in my head, and I see birds in the tree. It's like, oh, it's so nice.
You want to hear a fun fact about birdsong?
Sure.
So I am a aspiring bird watcher. Okay, I'll make this really quick. I'm going to do all this in 60 seconds. But humans having co-evolved with birds, we have a subconscious relationship with birdsong because birds won't sing unless they feel like they are free from threat. So the human brain unconsciously associates birdsong with lack of threat.
Oh, that's cool.
So one of the takeaways from today's episode for me that I'm really grateful for is when I take a closer look at being self-accountable, and you brought up the idea of, or the ideas came up of self-reflecting and self-regulating. When I am better able to regulate and take responsibility for my emotions, I feel that it has been easier for me to find compassion for others, even if they are not being accountable to themselves or others. And life has been a lot easier when I can find that compassion. It's not like I'm over there coddling them, right? But it lets me let go of some of the anger and strain that probably is coming from projection.
Yeah.
So I feel like I feel more compassionate for others because I came on real strong with the self-accountability. But you made me think more about how that plays into the greater structure of society, and how I've been a lone wolf most of my life, and I miss community, and I'm grateful for feeling that here. And it just reminds me that, I don't need to do everything alone. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, I think
a great place to end.
Yeah, and that's the podcast.
Tune in next time, and thank you very much. And cut yourself some slack, you beautiful soul.
And be curious.
Yeah, don't shit on yourself.
Take care, buddy.